When human beings first looked up into the night sky, they did more than count the stars. They wondered what those distant lights might mean, how far away they were, and whether it was possible to travel not only across space but also across the mysterious landscape of time. For thousands of years, the idea of moving backward into the past or forward into the future has haunted the imagination of civilizations. It has been written in folklore, whispered in myths, and painted in the dreams of visionaries who could not help but think that our lives were not as fixed as they seemed. The human spirit has always longed to bend the boundaries of existence, and the idea of time travel remains the purest reflection of that desire. From ancient accounts of prophets who claim to foresee the future, to tales of strangers appearing in villages speaking of events yet to come, the idea that someone might slip through the curtain of time is as old as storytelling itself. In old manuscripts, a monk might describe a man who vanished for years but returned unchanged, while the world outside had aged and moved on. In oral traditions passed down through generations, tribes spoke of sky beings who came with warning of upcoming disasters, their knowledge too precise to ignore. Whether one sees these tales as folklore or foresight, they reveal how deeply humanity has always wondered not just about the world we inhabit, but also about the hidden dimensions that may surround us. Yet it was not only mythmakers or storytellers who dreamed of breaking the chains of time. As science matured and learned to measure the speed of planets, the pull of gravity, and the behavior of light itself, new questions arose. Could time truly be bent? Could its flow, which we experience as constant, be nothing but a fragile perception, an imperfect measurement of a deeper reality? By the 20th century, with Einstein's theory of relativity reshaping our view of physics, the discussion no longer belonged only to poets but also to scientists. Time was no longer fixed. They realized it could slow down, stretch forward, or compress, depending on the speed at which one traveled or the gravity to which one clung. Suddenly, time travel moved a step away from fantasy and leaned ever so slightly toward possibility. But even long before equations suggested the flexibility of time, there had been hints scattered across the strange record of human history. Photographs emerged in old archives that appeared to show people holding objects far beyond their time. Reports circulated of men and women found wandering with accents that matched no known region, speaking of years that had not arrived yet. Skeptics dismissed these as nonsense, coincidences, or simple mistakes preserved in rumor. But the stories persisted because the human mind has always been drawn to anomalies. Moments of disruption, when something does not fit the familiar story of history, are like cracks in the glass of reality, suggesting that behind this fragile frame there may be larger forces at work. And still, every story leads back to one question. What if one day we uncovered proof that could not be dismissed? Proof that someone had traveled through time, leaving behind evidence so undeniable that even the most skeptical eye would have to pause. That possibility is staggering not only because it reshapes what we think we know, but also because it changes what we imagine we are capable of becoming. The discovery of such proof, no matter how subtle or accidental, would be like hearing an echo from tomorrow or a whisper from yesterday. It would remind us we are not only creatures of the present moment, but participants in a far greater continuum. In modern culture, from novels to cinema, the theme of time travel has become one of the quintessential stories through which we examine ourselves. We picture travelers stepping into machines of glimmering energy, or stumbling into portals hidden in forests, or being blinded by sudden flashes that pull them out of their own era and into another. These are only fictions, of course, but they resonate with us deeply because they articulate the longing to escape the irreversible march of time. to go back to correct a mistake, to revisit a lost loved one, or to leap forward and glimpse the destiny of humanity. These are the dreams that tie the concept of time travel so closely to the emotional core of human life. Nobody yearns to travel through time for trivial reasons. The fantasy carries the weight of regret, the hope of renewal, and the hunger for knowledge. Now imagine sitting alone at night, the world quiet, the shadows resting gently along the edges of your room. In that stillness, a strange thought surfaces. Perhaps proof lies out there already, waiting to be found. Perhaps the clue is in an object at a museum that curators dismiss as an anomaly. Perhaps it sits buried beneath library dust, a document from another era that some long-forgotten historian could not explain. Perhaps it has been seen in plain sight, recorded in an image or carved into stone, only overlooked by eyes unwilling to believe. The idea carries a subtle thrill and an equally subtle unease. Because if proof does exist, the question becomes not simply whether time travel is possible, but what it means that someone is already practicing it. Who are they, and why are they here? The possibility of encountering proof of time travel is not only a scientific thought experiment but also a deeply human meditation on the nature of destiny. Are we bound to a singular path, or can alterations ripple through time like waves across a pond? If a traveler steps backward to change a small detail, to whisper in the ear of someone who will alter history in great ways, do we awaken tomorrow in a world reshaped beyond recognition? Or are we forever locked into a timeline so resilient that no visitor from the future can disturb it? These questions stir in the imagination of anyone who lingers long on the subject, because they touch on what we fear most: the fragility of our lives, the impermanence of our choices, and the possibility that everything we take as stable may be no more than a fragile arrangement of moments. But for the opening of this journey, let us pause not on the mechanics but on the feeling. To hear of time travel is to feel wonder tinged with unease. It is to peer toward a horizon that we cannot reach yet sense might exist. The pull is magnetic. As though the future is calling back to us, reminding us that we have not yet uncovered the full story of existence. That story will be written not only by the march of days but also by the boldness of imagination. It is the imagination that allows us to construct machines on paper, to dream of futures yet unimaginable, to weave myth into maps and science into prophecy. Proof of time travelers would stand as the ultimate reward of such imagination, confirmation that reality is still stranger than all the tales we have told. And so our exploration begins here, in the doorway of a question that has lingered across centuries. What if we found proof of time travelers? What if, hidden within the fabric of our history, small clues were waiting to be revealed? What if one day we woke not into the ordinary world we trust but into a new recognition that we have always been accompanied, watched not only by the eyes of our ancestors and our descendants, but perhaps also by travelers slipping quietly between the shadows of time? The possibility lingers, fragile as candlelight, ready to illuminate the depths of our wonder. When considering proof of time travelers, the first question that gently rises to the surface is this: what would such proof even look like? The concept is, by its very nature, slippery. If someone moves through time, how could their passage be marked? Would they leave behind objects too advanced for their era, or traces of knowledge that no person of their time could reasonably possess? Would their appearance in historical records be strange enough to signal their presence? Or, perhaps most intriguing of all, might the proof already be here, hidden in plain sight, waiting for eyes to notice? The search for such evidence is both simple and impossibly complex, for it forces us to define not only how a time traveler might reveal themselves but also what kind of evidence calls for belief in the first place. Imagine, for example, the discovery of an object lying deep within the soil of an archaeological dig, perfectly sealed in the earth for centuries. The site is carefully mapped, the layers of stone and dirt meticulously documented. And yet, nestled where no modern tool should ever appear, lies something undeniably out of place, a small piece of metal shaped with precision, its edges smooth as though cut by machines centuries before such machines existed. At first, scientists would debate. They would search for explanations. Did the artifact fall in later through cracks or shifts in the ground? Was contamination from a later age overlooked? But suppose every careful test revealed the same thing: the object is impossibly ancient, resting in a layer undisturbed for thousands of years, and yet its composition matches alloys and technologies only invented in our recent era. That single artifact would stand like a whisper from tomorrow buried in yesterday's soil. Artifacts, of course, are only one form of potential clue. Another lies in written words, manuscripts, diaries, or official chronicles in which individuals describe sights or experiences they could not possibly have known. Imagine reading a letter penned for centuries ago by a villager describing a box of light that could capture faces, or a journey across the skies in a machine faster than the wings of birds. Most historians would dismiss such passages as metaphor, fantasy, or religious vision, but what if the description held specific details too exact to ignore? Details that reveal a camera, an airplane, or even a digital screen centuries before such things were created. Proof here would not necessarily come from the simple mention of wonders, but from precise and accurate technical parallels that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. The written world has always been a frozen time capsule, and within those fragile pages, one can imagine the quiet footprints of travelers leaving behind fragments of memory belonging to a different era. And then there are images themselves. In the modern world, photographs have become what we trust as visual truth. Yet photographs are also strange, because as time moves forward, new eyes often notice things that old eyes could not interpret. There are countless claims of so-called time-slip photographs, ancient pictures in which one person seems to carry an object far beyond their era, or clothing that belongs to another century, or even modern accessories like sunglasses, headphones, or cell phones spotted in crowds long before such items were said to exist. Skeptics point to explanation after explanation: trick of the light, objects mistaken for familiar shapes, or even deliberate hoaxes. But one has to wonder, if a real time traveler existed, might their own disguise slip, captured accidentally in the frame of a photograph not meant to record them? Such an image, if undeniable, if tested and authenticated beyond all doubt, could itself become the clearest proof. A single picture could change the entire story we tell ourselves about history. Proof could also lie not in the physical but in the informational. Consider the mysterious predictions scattered throughout history. Some appear as prophecies, penned by mystics or seers. Others hide in documents written by ordinary scholars making claims that somehow align perfectly with discoveries centuries later. Nostradamus is perhaps the most famous figure cited for such predictions, though his verses are so vague they can be interpreted endlessly. But what if we moved beyond vague poetry? Suppose a document from hundreds of years ago described the functioning of electricity in detail, or gave precise scientific formulas not uncovered until much later. If traced authentically, such knowledge could be a clue not to supernatural foresight, but to someone who came back with knowledge of discoveries yet to be made. Proof, in this case, would be intellectual rather than physical, a window into thought arriving ahead of its time. The possibility extends further still, into the anomalies recorded in official accounts of history. There are legends of men and women appearing suddenly in times and places with no record of their origins. Stories of strangers who seemed confused, speaking in dialects no one could identify, sometimes carrying coins that bore no mark of the known world. Most such accounts are dismissed as folklore or exaggeration, tales meant to thrill or amuse. But within archives, perhaps some of these records are genuine glimpses of anomalies. If one day historians unearthed official legal records from centuries ago that described a court case involving a stranger with impossible objects, would that not demand reconsideration? Small events of strangeness pepper history, and in their accumulation, they form a suggestive cloud that some interpreters smoke from a hidden fire. Beyond history, proof could even lie buried in the present. Modern stories exist of individuals who claim to be time travelers. Most pass unremarked, treated as hoaxes or delusions. Some offer clues in internet forums, claiming to provide warnings or glimpses of possible futures. Typically these vanish, unverified, becoming nothing but digital folklore. But let us imagine, what if one of these figures provided information so precise, so verifiable, that the world could no longer ignore it? If a traveler correctly predicted the unfolding of events not yet visible to anyone, and the accuracy proved impossible to dismiss, that, too, could serve as undeniable proof. And this is perhaps the most unsettling possibility of all, that proof would arrive through paradox. Imagine meeting a person who not only claims to come from the future but also knows details about your life no one else could possibly know. In their possession rests an object that bears your name, not yet created but unmistakably tied to you. Such an encounter would collapse the boundary between skepticism and belief, leaving only awe. Personal paradox is a deeply disturbing form of proof, one that hits at the core of identity. If someone from a future you have not lived yet knows the choices you will make, what does that mean for the freedom you hold so dearly? Proof here would not only confirm the existence of time travelers but threaten the very concept of free will. The challenge of proof is not only in discovery but also in interpretation. For every potential anomaly, many will argue coincidence, error, or fraud. It is in the nature of human understanding to resist rewriting the structure of reality until forced. True proof, therefore, would need to transcend doubt. It would not be a single photograph or curious artifact but a convergence of evidence that survives every attempt at dismissal. Proof, if it comes, will not be one whisper from another time but a chorus of echoes aligning into a melody too perfect to deny. Imagine museums suddenly reclassifying artifacts, historians reinterpreting old texts, scientists recalculating assumptions, all because undeniable threads of evidence have been woven too tightly to ignore. The emergence of true proof would not be a flash or a revelation but a slow, steady realization pressing against the world until it could no longer be refused. Let us also imagine how such proof might feel on a personal level. You are walking through the quiet halls of an old archive, brushing your fingers across the spines of books worn by time. You pause before a manuscript, its ink faded and pages fragile, and as you read, the words describe an invention from your own century. The description is far too precise, referencing gears and fuels and speeds and terms your ancestors could not have known. The moment is unnerving. You close the book, look around the silent archive, and realize that in your hands, you hold something impossible. Proof, perhaps, stares back at you from the faded ink. Proof does not always need to be vast or spectacular. It may exist in subtle places, like a small secret waiting for discovery in the cracks of the world. If proof is found, humanity will face not only the marvel of discovery but also questions that cannot be silenced. Who are these travelers? Are they our descendants returning to observe? Are they explorers from civilizations beyond Earth, who found a way to bend not only space but time? Are they lone wanderers, or emissaries of some grander agenda? Proof does more than confirm the possibility. It opens the floodgates of questions, each cascading into infinity. Finding evidence of time travelers is not the end of a search, it is the beginning of an even deeper one, where every answer spins into new mysteries about our place in the universe. There is also the question of intent. If proof appears, what does it mean about why they came? Travelers might visit the past to witness history, simply observing events like historians of flesh and bone. Others might come bearing warnings, nudging humanity along a better path. Still others may arrive with less benevolent motives, seeking to change history for their own advantage. Proof, once confirmed, therefore carries not only intellectual weight but a moral dimension. Are we safe, or are we pawns in a theater far larger than we can perceive? The mere fact of proof awakens unease as well as wonder, because it reminds us that the flow of our lives is no longer solely our own. But perhaps the most profound dimension of proof lies in how it would redefine time itself. To see evidence of time travelers is to accept that past, present, and future are not as fixed and linear as we once believed. Time ceases to be a one-way current and becomes instead an ocean in which one might dive into different depths. Proof would confirm that reality flows in ways unimaginable, that our concept of a straight arrow from birth to death is too simple for the universe's complexity. The moment proof emerges, our most basic assumptions about existence would be rewritten. For many, this would be unsettling, like waking from a dream into a different reality. For others, it would be liberating, opening endless possibilities of exploration. In the quiet of this contemplation, one realizes that the search for proof has always been less about confirming travelers and more about confronting time itself. If proof were found, it would be less like pulling a curtain aside and more like realizing the curtain was never there. We would understand that the story of humankind has never been confined to the narrow present we cling to, but stretched across centuries, woven into both what has been and what will be. The footprints of travelers would remind us that our lives are pages within a book still being written, with layers upon layers extending forward and back. For now, the proof we seek remains elusive. Perhaps artifacts will one day emerge, photographs will be reconsidered, or predictions found too precise to ignore. Perhaps somewhere, in some quiet room, a scientist or historian already holds the key but hesitates to reveal it, knowing the consequences would ripple across every field of knowledge. Or perhaps the proof is yet to come, arriving not from dusty archives but from future meetings, when those who journey through time finally choose to step forward openly. Until that day, we wait, listening for hints, searching for clues, imagining what shape proof might take when it finally arrives. And so, as the question deepens, we return again to wonder. What if such proof were not fantasy but reality? What if one day we wake to headlines reporting a discovery that cannot be denied, an object, a text, a figure who defies explanation? What if the quiet longings of mythology, science, and imagination converge into the undeniable presence of evidence? That moment would mark the beginning of a new human story. Proof of time travelers would not simply change what we know. It would remind us that reality is not a confined corridor but a vast expanse. It would whisper softly into the silence of night, calling us forward into a future where time itself is no longer a wall, but a pathway waiting to be explored. If proof of time travelers were truly discovered, humanity's first instinct would be wonder, but the second instinct would be something far more precise, to ask what this means for the most fundamental science we know. For generations, physics has been the language by which we describe the rules of reality that hold the universe together. If time travel exists, if it has been achieved not only in fantasy but in actuality, then something about those rules must contain more room, more flexibility, than we once imagined. The discovery would not only inspire excitement, it would tear open the very framework of modern science and force us to reconstruct a worldview that has been standing cautiously for over a century. We begin at the foundation of what has long guided our understanding, Einstein's theory of relativity. At the dawn of the 20th century, relativity rewrote the way we think about time. Until then, time had been imagined as universal, flowing the same for everyone, constant and unchanging, a backdrop against which all of existence unfolded. But Einstein shattered that illusion. Time, he revealed, bends and warps alongside space. It stretches when we move near the speed of light. It slows down under the grip of powerful gravity. Two people can live through passages of time at different rates depending on where they stand in the cosmos or how fast they travel. This was not fiction, nor speculation, it was demonstrated by experiment, from clocks flying in planes to signals reaching satellites high above Earth. Relativity transformed time from a flat, rigid river into an elastic field. And in that elasticity lies the first hint of time travel. If proof of travel has arrived, physicists would seize upon relativity as both a comfort and a challenge. Comfort, because relativistic time dilation already offers a taste of time travel, astronauts orbiting Earth age a fraction of a second slower than those on the ground. But proof that someone moved deliberately through centuries, not just split seconds, would demand new extrapolations of relativity. Were they moving at velocities near light speed, making subjective years pass while centuries slipped by back on Earth? Or had they found a way to use the most extreme gravitational fields, perhaps near black holes, to distort time so dramatically that the leap across eras became possible? If so, proof would serve as validation that relativity holds not only in mathematics but in practice, stretched to unimaginable extremes. Yet relativity alone is not sufficient to explain the whole phenomenon, and this is where proof would truly unsettle science. For decades, physicists have speculated on so-called closed time-like curves, structures in space-time that loop back upon themselves. Wormholes, hypothetical tunnels through space-time, provide one route. If such tunnels can exist, vastly shortened bridges between distant points, then under certain conditions they could also connect different times rather than just different locations. The challenge has always been creating, stabilizing, and surviving such wormholes, because their theoretical construction demands exotic matter substances with properties unlike anything we have yet observed. Proof of time travelers would imply that such exotic conditions are not only possible but already harnessed. It would be the equivalent of discovering that an invisible door long suspected to exist had already been found and walked through. For quantum mechanics, the consequences would be even stranger. Unlike relativity, which describes the large-scale fabric of space and time, quantum mechanics governs the subatomic, the tiniest scales of energy and matter. Already, the quantum world brims with paradox and mystery, particles that exist in multiple states until observed, entangled partners that respond to each other faster than light can travel, fields of probability instead of certainty governing reality. If proof of time travelers came, many scientists would suspect quantum physics must be the true key. Perhaps time travelers found a way to exploit quantum uncertainty, slipping between possible states of reality. Perhaps they cracked open the principle that distinguishes past from future, discovering that time itself, like a particle state, is less fixed than we perceive. Proof would not just suggest that time can be bent, it would demand a full integration of relativity and quantum mechanics into a deeper theory we have only glimpsed in dreams. For decades, physicists have sought a grand unified theory that could link the immense scope of relativity with the delicate dance of quantum mechanics. Proof of time travelers might provide the missing clue. It would be undeniable evidence that both theories, however accurate in their domains, are incomplete without a broader understanding. One could imagine an equation not yet born, a new description of reality in which space, time, energy, and probability dance as one. That equation would explain how a traveler could step from one century into another as naturally as stepping across a riverbank. Proof of time travelers would not simply extend our physics, it could finally fulfill the longing for unity that has haunted science since the days of Einstein. Of course, alongside the wonder of discovery comes the unease of paradox. One of the greatest conundrums of theoretical time travel has always been the paradox problem. What happens if a traveler alters events of the past? The famous grandfather paradox asks what would happen if a traveler went back and prevented their own existence. Does the universe unravel? Does reality branch into new timelines? Or does it resist to protect its continuity, enforcing outcomes no matter what the traveler does? Proof of actual time travelers would mean that one of these answers, long regarded as speculation, must be real. If a traveler has already altered the past, then either we live in a branching multiverse or our memories themselves have been shaped by changes we cannot perceive. If travelers cannot alter events, then we live in a universe governed by a deeper law of consistency, one that bends but never breaks. Proof would force us to confront directly which of these possibilities defines our reality. The consequences would ripple outward across every scientific field. Cosmology, the study of the universe as a whole, would have to adjust its models of the Big Bang and cosmic expansion to account for travelers who move contrary to the expected flow of time. Biology and neuroscience would face questions about the effects of time travel on living organisms, how the body, and especially the brain, withstands transitions across eras. Chemistry and engineering would demand understanding of the exotic materials that allow wormholes or time machines to remain stable. Even information theory would be challenged to consider whether messages can be sent backward through time and what that means for the concept of causality. Proof would not belong to physics alone, it would ignite a storm of rethinking across every dimension of science. Furthermore, we must ask how proof would affect the philosophy of science itself. For centuries, science has thrived on the assumption that experiments proceed forward, cause yields effect, and time is the stage upon which measurements unfold. If proof reveals that the stage itself can be altered or crossed, then scientific reasoning must expand to include feedback loops where the future influences the past. Experiments might one day involve not only repeating procedures but checking for interference from future witnesses. Imagine laboratories designed with detectors not only to measure present signals but to listen for echoes transmitted backward from technologies yet to be built. The scientific method itself would no longer rest on linearity but on flows both forward and back. Proof of time travelers would not simply add new data, it would alter the very structure of how we define evidence. And yet, amid all this, doubt remains inevitable. Some scientists would argue, even in the presence of proof, that the anomalies reflect phenomena misunderstood, not genuine time travel. Others would demand reproducibility proof is only proof if it can be studied, tested, and repeated. If time travelers exist, can they be engaged with directly, asked to demonstrate their ability under controlled conditions? Can a machine be inspected, a wormhole measured, a clock traced against events? Without this, proof risks remaining suspended in the uneasy light of anomaly, compelling yet unconfirmed. For proof to reshape science fully, it must be tangible, repeatable, and undeniable. Anything less would leave space for skepticism to survive at the margins of belief. Still, the thought remains that once undeniable proof arrives, the human imagination cannot help but press outward to application. If time travel is possible, and if it has been proven by the presence of travelers, then surely humanity will strive to replicate it. Entire fields of engineering would rise with the singular goal of creating the first human-built time machines. Research institutions would devote themselves not just to understanding wormholes or energy manipulation but to constructing devices that allow us to step beyond our own moment. Proof becomes not merely a window into reality, it becomes a challenge to human ingenuity. The day proof emerges is the day that scientists, engineers, and dreamers across the globe begin devoting everything to making the impossible accessible. The implications, of course, would extend far beyond laboratories. Proof that time travel exists would ripple through societies with force. Politicians would ask how governments might use or prevent the use of such technologies. Militaries would either possibility of advantage, not only moving across space but across time in warfare. Economists would puzzle over the instability created by information pulled from the future, markets shaken by knowledge of what is to come. Even ordinary citizens would struggle with the meaning of their lives in a world where time is no longer an unbreakable barrier. Proof would not stay contained, it would spill outward into every domain of human activity, each shaped by the new physics of possibility. Still, at the core of all these transformations lies the deepest scientific consequence, that proof of time travelers would prove our knowledge is still partial. For generations, humanity has gazed into the cosmos and believed itself close to a complete map of how reality works. With relativity, with quantum mechanics, with modern cosmology, we have answered so much. And yet, proof of travelers would be a whisper reminding us that the universe remains far stranger than we have dared to calculate. That whisper would not only humble us but inspire us. It would remind us that the work of science is unending, and that even the greatest theories are still provisional, waiting for the next leap of discovery. Proof would awaken the same instinct that has carried us from firelight to starflight, the instinct to keep going, to keep searching, to keep asking what lies beyond the veil. In the end, the discovery of proof would not close the chapter on mystery. It would open it wider than ever before. For though time travel has long been an idea whispered in fantasy, proof would confirm it as part of reality itself. And reality once expanded can never again shrink back into ignorance. Science would bend, shatter, and reform around the revelation, its equations reshaped, its theories rewritten. And through it all, humanity would stand in awe of the discovery that time, the most intimate dimension of our existence, is no longer a line we must obey but a horizon we may cross. If proof of time travelers truly existed, the first disciplines shaken beyond recognition would be history and archaeology. These fields have long represented humanity's attempt to look backward with rigor, to piece together the story of who we are and how we came to be. Every artifact uncovered by archaeologists, every inscription studied by historians, adds another fragment to the grand mosaic of civilization. Yet that mosaic has always been constructed with a silent assumption: time moves forward in a straight, unbroken line. Cultures rise, they invent, they leave their tools and their ruins, and they fall, giving way to the next. But proof of time travelers would shatter that foundational assumption. Suddenly, all of history would have to be reconsidered, not as a neat chronology but as a landscape in which influences may have crossed from the future to the past, in which anomalies may not be errors but genuine footprints from travelers who did not belong to their era. Consider the way archaeologists treat out-of-place artifacts, often referred to as anomalies. These are objects discovered in settings that seem impossibly advanced for the time period. For centuries, such finds have been catalogued, debated, and often dismissed as contamination, misidentification, or fraud. But if proof of time travelers appeared, even in a single undeniable case, the ripple effect would be immense. Those long-dismissed anomalies would be revisited with new eyes. A clay figurine shaped like an artifact of modern machinery, once shrugged off as coincidence, would suddenly invite serious scrutiny. A carving that appears to depict a flying machine, long dismissed as symbolic or religious, would now carry a new potential meaning. Perhaps it was drawn by eyes that had glimpsed technology centuries ahead of schedule. Proof would act like a switch, transforming oddities into potential timestamps of visitation. The puzzle of history would rearrange itself into new constellations. This transformation would extend beyond artifacts to the written accounts of ancient cultures. Historians know well that myths and chronicles are layered with metaphor and symbolism. Tales of gods descending from the skies, of messengers arriving with knowledge beyond the people's current understanding, have typically been classified as folklore or religious imagery. But proof of real-time travelers would compel a re-evaluation of these stories. When an ancient text speaks of strangers arriving from the future, the phrase might stop being a poetic flourish and instead be reinterpreted as an accurate record of a culture encountering travelers from another time. Legends that once served as myth might suddenly be read as eyewitness accounts. The rediscovery of such texts would reshape our understanding of how deeply the presence of travelers may already have been preserved, hidden among fable and song. Imagine, for instance, the implications for the great civilizations that have vanished but left behind monumental ruins. The pyramids of Egypt, Stonehenge in England, the Great Step Pyramids of Mesoamerica, the carved city of Petra all have been the subject of theories, both scientific and speculative, about how they were built, who inspired them, and why they aligned with the stars so precisely. If time travelers exist, then one cannot escape the possibility that some elements of this ancient construction were influenced by knowledge carried backward. While mainstream archaeology has always championed the ingenuity of ancient peoples, proof of time travelers would not erase that ingenuity. It would simply open the possibility that in moments of their history, they encountered guidance, tools, or even hints drawn from centuries ahead. The partnership of ancient hands and futuristic minds might explain details that still perplex us today. Once proof existed, the boundary between myth and mechanism would blur in ways we could no longer deny. Archaeology thrives on dating material remains, aligning them into chronological narratives. Whole theories of cultural development rest on these sequences. But if proof confirmed that individuals or objects from the future had reached into the past, then the linearity of these sequences would falter. The strange presence of objects we have always deemed anachronistic would no longer be irrational. For example, the discovery of mechanisms like the Antikythera device, an ancient Greek artifact that functions like a complex astronomical computer, has puzzled scientists for decades. The skill it required seems centuries out of place. While historians have explained it as a lost genius of invention, proof of time travel would suggest a more radical possibility, that knowledge flowed backward, perhaps deliberately, perhaps accidentally. Artifacts out of place would no longer stand as eccentric mysteries but as part of a grander story we had not yet acknowledged. Beyond objects and ruins, proof would inflame the re-evaluation of personal histories. Every great leader, prophet, or innovator might come under suspicion of having been influenced by outsiders. Did remarkable bursts of knowledge, which seemed too sudden for their age, happen because time travelers whispered secrets into the ears of those prepared to listen? When a philosopher of antiquity spoke of ideas that sound uncannily modern, is it possible they were taught by someone not of their time? These questions would shake the foundations of historical study, replacing centuries of confidence with new uncertainty. It would no longer be enough to ask how cultures interacted with each other. We would have to ask who may have entered from other centuries. Historians would be compelled to review, line by line, the records of human civilization for signatures of influence that no contemporaneous source could explain. In the field of anthropology, too, the consequences would be vast. Human culture is understood as an evolving system, where ideas build upon prior ideas in a chain of gradual refinement. But proof of travelers would suggest that at least some links in that chain may have been leaps, seeded not by gradual development but by sudden injections of knowledge from the future. The origins of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine might be reconsidered under this lens. Were there travelers who seeded these arts early? Were they gifts, or were they accidents, revelations that slipped into history unintentionally? Entire cultural revolutions might have new explanations. Instead of random bursts of human genius, they might reflect points where the past touched briefly upon knowledge from what had not yet occurred. At the same time, archaeology would face the profound challenge of separating genuine human progress from traveler influence. If travelers intervened, then how much of what we credit to ancient cultures truly belonged to them, and how much was seeded from outside their time? This poses a delicate paradox, because proof of time travelers could either diminish or exalt our view of ancestors. Diminish, because it might suggest they did not achieve alone what we thought they had. Exalt, because it might reveal their openness to knowledge, their brilliance in adapting new ideas, their cultural willingness to weave future hints into their present reality. The interpretation could swing either way, but it would ensure that our reverence for history could never again be uncritical. One of the most profound effects would occur not only on the facts of history but on how it is taught. Classrooms, museums, and books are designed to teach a clear progression of ages. But sudden proof would make every timeline tentative, every story provisional. Imagine a history textbook rewritten to include not only wars and discoveries but also insertions of possible traveler influence. Imagine a museum exhibit where artifacts are displayed not only with their era but with a question mark: was this influenced by time travelers? Such displays would alter not only knowledge but imagination, inviting us to view our ancestors as participants in a story stretching across centuries rather than confined within their own moment. Proof would expand the role of history education from linear narrative into multidimensional puzzle. Historians would also be compelled to confront the boundaries of verification. Until now, they verify through evidence, primary sources, carbon dating, comparative study. But what happens when proof demands acknowledging that information itself may no longer flow one way? A letter from the future slipped into an archive in the past could confound centuries of verification. If journalists today are cautious about misinformation, imagine the challenge historians would face if evidence can arrive out of sequence. Proof of travelers would demand entirely new methods of source criticism, where the date of a document is no longer the only factor in its authenticity. They would need to develop ways to distinguish genuine traveler artifacts from forgeries, and in doing so, history would never again be a simple matter of sequence, it would become a study in layered timelines. The impact on collective memory would be immense. Civilizations define themselves by their past. We look back at the struggles of our ancestors, the rise of empires, the discoveries that shaped our present. Proof that travelers had walked among them would rewrite identity itself. A nation that believes itself the product of ancient genius might instead come to see itself as the beneficiary of knowledge slipped backward from later years. The pride of heritage, the connection to ancestors, would find itself entwined with the strange reality of external influence. This sharing between eras could be viewed as a gift, or as an intrusion. And those perceptions would vary from culture to culture, each interpreting traveler footprints in ways shaped by modern needs. Proof of travelers is not only a scientific discovery, it is a mirror held up to civilization, reflecting back questions about who we are. At a personal level, proof resonates deeply with the human longing for connection across time. We look at ruins and feel awe because they remind us that people lived, loved, and struggled before us. Proof of travelers would transform that awe into something more startling. Perhaps those ancient people also looked forward, meeting individuals from centuries ahead. We would realize that our connection with the past is not only symbolic but may have been literal, woven by the steps of travelers who stood both in ancient landscapes and in futures we have yet to live. Every stone structure, every faded manuscript, every bronze figure might now hold shadows of those encounters. Proof would allow us to feel less alone in our timeline, reminding us that human history has always been touched by others who crossed the divide. There is an additional layer to consider: how cultures of the past would have reacted if they witnessed time travelers. To some, they might have appeared as divine figures. To others, as sorcerers or strange foreigners. Entire mythologies might have been built around these encounters. The concept of gods descending, of heroes carrying impossible weapons, may trace back to such meetings. Proof would thus not only reshape archaeology but theology, myth, and anthropology, showing that what we once thought of as divinity may have been more tangible, travelers bridging time, mistaken for beings from the heavens. Proof would compel us to reconsider ancient religions not only as spiritual systems but possibly as cultural memories of encounters with visitors bearing future knowledge. The difference between myth and memory would blur until we could no longer separate them with confidence. All of this would challenge modern identity just as it challenged ancient perception. For while the discovery of proof would alter how we see our ancestors, it would also alter how our descendants might see us. If travelers from the future walk among us today, then we ourselves may one day become the subject of archaeological speculation by those far ahead. We too may leave behind anomalies, traces that future historians puzzle over. The cycle continues, in which every age becomes both the recorder and recorded, the observer and the observed. Proof of travelers would remind us that time is not a line but a web, each generation intersecting with others backward and forward. Archaeology, far from being a practice of looking only behind, would become a practice of looking both behind and ahead. The enormity of this transformation cannot be overstated. For centuries, humanity has carried a quiet confidence that the past is fixed, the present is fleeting, and the future is not yet written. Proof of time travelers denies that simplicity. The past may have already been visited, the future may already be influencing us. The work of history and archaeology, under such conditions, is no longer merely descriptive. It becomes participatory, a shared narrative unfolding across centuries, where every discovery reveals not only what was but what intermingled between eras. Proof forces us to realize that the story of humanity has always been larger than we imagined, stretching across timelines woven together in ways we barely comprehend. Thus, the discovery of proof does not simply alter science, it redefines memory itself. Archaeology becomes more than the unearthing of stones and bones. History becomes more than the study of wars and kings. They both become part of a timeless dialogue between humanity and its own shadow across time. In recognizing proof, we are not only acknowledging travelers. We are acknowledging that the fabric of the past, the contours of civilization, and perhaps even the myths that shaped us are all resonances of a deeper truth. History may never have belonged solely to the past. It may always have been shaped by those who walk across the corridors of time, leaving behind whispers in stone, in ink, and in the very rhythm of the civilizations we thought we understood. If proof of time travelers truly came to light, its most profound shockwaves would not fall upon laboratories or museums alone, but upon the very heart of human society. Civilizations are built on shared beliefs about where we came from, where we are going, and how the present should be lived. Those beliefs are sustained not by equations or ruins, but by the collective sense of meaning that people carry day to day. When proof emerges that there are travelers among us, crossing from century to century as easily as one steps across a threshold, that sense of meaning begins to tremble. People in every community, every culture, every land would feel the ground shift beneath them, and the responses would be as varied and complex as the people themselves. The first reaction might well be wonder, for wonder is a universal human instinct. The thought that we are not trapped within the current day but connected with other eras awakens something in us that feels both thrilling and humbling. In city streets and rural villages alike, ordinary people might gaze up at the sky with a new awareness, imagining that eyes from the distant future might already be gazing back upon them. Conversations would ripple across families, classrooms, and workplaces. Children would ask their parents if travelers from the future could be watching at that very moment. Artists would begin sketching portals, streets filled with strangers dressed not for our century but for one still unimaginable. The sense of wonder would spread like fire, and for a moment, the world would feel unified in awe at the sheer vastness of time. And yet, wonder never travels alone. With it comes the shadow of fear. If there are time travelers among us, or if there have been throughout history, then humanity might ask what this means for freedom, for control, for destiny itself. Some would fear that every choice is already observed, every moment already known. A person may lie awake at night haunted by the idea that their most private actions were not merely personal but recorded by visitors from an age yet to come. Suspicion would blossom if the future can touch the present. How much of our lives are truly our own? This fear would manifest in countless ways: distrust of leaders, suspicion of neighbors, paranoia that strangers may not belong to our age at all. Proof of time travel would not only inspire, it would unsettle the fragile security on which societies depend. Religion and philosophy would stir intensely in response. For millennia, belief systems have provided frameworks for the mysteries of existence. Proof of time travelers might be interpreted as confirmation of divine beings for some, as evidence of cosmic order for others, or as a challenge to long-held doctrine for many. Some faiths might seize upon the revelation as validation. Prophets of old, seen through this new lens, may now be described as time travelers rather than supernatural messengers. Others might see the proof as intrusion, reducing the space for mystery and spirituality by replacing it with mechanics and physics. Temples, churches, and mosques would fill with debates about whether travelers are merely human or something more profound, actors fulfilling destinies written long before. In the quiet halls of philosophy, meanwhile, scholars would reflect on the essence of freedom. If the future has already touched us, can we truly claim the right to shape our own lives? Or are we merely characters unfolding in a story that has been seen before? Society thrives on order, but proof of travelers would loosen that order. In streets around the world, protests and celebrations might erupt side by side. Some would demand transparency. Who are the travelers? Why are they here? And what do they want? Others would plead for secrecy, for the preservation of the innocence that comes with not knowing. In bustling marketplaces, people might begin to dress differently, to act differently, not only for themselves but in the suspicion that they are being observed from the eyes of tomorrow. Popular media would seize upon the theme, producing films, novels, songs, and plays about travelers and their worldly influence. What once was fiction would now carry new weight, blurring the line between imagination and reality in every cultural form. The economic world, too, would feel the tremors. If the future can be known, even slightly, then markets would quake under the possibility of foresight. Traders might fear that some already possess knowledge of tomorrow's shifts. Businesses would wonder if innovation is authentic or borrowed whispers from years to come. Ordinary workers may worry whether their skills, painstakingly learned in the present, remain relevant in a timeline where advancements might leap unexpectedly backward. Proof of time travelers would create both fear and opportunity, inspiring some to accelerate innovation while leaving others paralyzed by the sense that progress is no longer theirs to make but already determined in some distant future. In politics, the revelation would be explosive. Governments would scramble not only to understand travelers but to control the narrative around them. Security agencies would wonder whether foreign powers wielded access to visitors from the future. Some nations might claim exclusive relationships with time travelers, whether true or fabricated, to assert dominance on the world stage. Others would panic at the thought of falling behind, fearing that national sovereignty could crumble if time itself has become a resource in which others are already invested. Proof would not only strengthen cooperation across borders, it might also ignite paranoia and competition more intense than any battle of weapons, because the very possession of knowledge from tomorrow would now mean power. At the community level, ordinary traditions would take on new layers of meaning. Festivals that honor ancestors might now be seen in light of future descendants as well, imagining that time is a circle in which the living commune not only with the past but with the future. Families might begin to speak of themselves not only in linear genealogies but in webs stretched across centuries. A grandmother telling stories to her grandchildren might pause to imagine that those grandchildren could one day meet travelers from countless generations ahead, creating threads across eras in ways never before considered. Proof would make the concept of family larger, binding us not only across generations forward but also back, held together by the knowledge that travelers might cross those thresholds at any moment. Artists and creators would feel this change at their core. Art thrives on the ability to stretch perspective, to imagine lives outside one's own. Proof of time travelers would hand artists the greatest palette of all, the palette of timelessness. Writers might craft stories where past and future characters converse easily, no longer limited by speculative fiction but anchored in possible truth. Painters might depict moments not only of the now but of simultaneous layers, capturing a landscape in which ancient ruins and futuristic towers coexist because they are already connected through travelers who linked them. Musicians could compose not only for today's ears but in the hope that future travelers, arriving centuries hence, might already be hearing their songs. Art would no longer be confined to one audience, it would speak to audiences across time, knowing that proof has given legitimacy to the concept of timeless reach. And yet, alongside cultural blossoming, there would be division. Not all would embrace the revelation of time travelers. Some communities might reject it entirely, clinging to the comfort of a linear world to preserve their sense of stability. Others might fracture into factions, those who welcome travelers as allies, and those who denounce them as intruders. Conspiracy theories would multiply, some rooted in truth, others in fear. Every unexplained event, every sudden shift in politics or environment, might be blamed on traveler interference. Proof would not eliminate doubt, it would fuel it in countless directions, each reshaping human society in ways both fragile and explosive. The psychological weight on individuals cannot be overstated. Ordinary people would find themselves asking unfamiliar questions about their own place in time. A young student might wonder whether their achievements truly belong to them or whether travelers had already shaped the path on which they walk. An elder reflecting on their life might ask if their memories are intact or subtly reshaped by someone who altered the past. Humanity, so used to carrying the burden of mortality alone, would now feel the heavier burden of temporality, that time itself may not protect or isolate us but may be traversed by others without our consent. This awareness could bring despair to some, a loss of control that shakes mental health. But it could also bring resilience to others, empowering them with the sense that their lives, however brief, are woven into a fabric far wider than they had realized. Communities would respond in profoundly different ways depending on their histories and traditions. Societies with strong mythological traditions of travelers, gods, or heroes might adapt more fluidly, integrating proof into narratives already familiar. For them, time travelers would be new names for old archetypes. Societies that have long embraced rationality and linear sciences, meanwhile, might struggle more deeply, their very intellectual traditions resisting the weight of proof. In some places, proof would be celebrated openly in festivals of wonder. In others, it would be hidden behind walls of resistance, denied by institutions desperate to preserve certainty. The cultural spectrum of reaction would be broad, a living reflection of humanity's diversity when faced with the unknown. Technology, propelled by society's fascination, would accelerate. With proof of travelers, countless inventors would imagine building what travelers already use. Children would dream of their own chance to walk into another century. Schools and universities would launch programs dedicated not only to physics but to temporal studies, teaching students not only math and literature but also how to think across time. Cultural focus would shift toward long-term perspective. Environmental activists, for instance, might interpret travelers as proof that humanity or some form of it survives into the future. That survival would ignite hope. Yet if the future seems dark in travelers' whispers, the reaction could instead be urgency and despair. Proof would not only motivate scientific progress, it would shift societal priorities for generations to come. Above all, proof of time travelers would test trust. Communities rely on the invisible trust that the world flows in ways understandable and predictable. If travelers exist, then part of that trust vanishes, replaced by questions that may never be fully answered. Are governments telling the truth about what they know? Are historical records unaltered? Are our futures still ours, or are they shaped by secret hands? Some people would embrace the mystery, welcoming travelers as fellow humans or fellow beings. Others would retreat into suspicion, pulling up walls against possibilities too heavy to face. In this tension, human society would find itself redrawn, its solidarity tested, its divisions amplified, its imagination stretched wider than ever before. And perhaps that is the final resonance to consider, the way proof of time travelers would shift human identity itself. Every culture has told itself a story of progress, of movement from past to future in a straight, unidirectional journey. Proof would destroy that story, replacing it with something more complex but perhaps truer. Humanity would no longer see itself as simply marching along the arrow of time, but rather as part of a web, threads crossing backward and forward, woven with visitors, exchanges, and echoes. Our identity would grow beyond the present moment, reaching back into the ancestors and outward into unborn generations simultaneously. We would learn to define ourselves not as captives of time but as participants in something far larger than time itself. For in the end, society is not merely about survival. It is about how we experience meaning. Proof of time travelers would not take away meaning, it would transform it. The sight of an undeniable traveler, the discovery of an irrefutable artifact, the confirmation of their presence in history, would remind us that meaning is not bounded by the years of our lives but flows across centuries. Some would resist, some would embrace, but all would feel it, the recognition that humanity belongs not only to the fabric of the now, but to the labyrinth of time itself. Society would change forever, reweaving its myths, rearranging its fears, and rediscovering its possibilities, all under the weight of proof that travelers have walked among us. If society as a whole would be shaken by proof of time travelers, then governments as the custodians of order and power within civilization would face perhaps the most profound disruption of all. Political structures thrive on the illusion of control, control over space, over resources, over information, and even over the imagination of people they represent. But proof of time travelers, undeniable and unshakable, would erode that fragile sense of control. Across every continent, in every capital city, leaders would find themselves confronted with a question they had never imagined could land upon their desks: what does it mean to govern in a world where time itself is not secure? The first reaction of governments would almost certainly be secrecy. In corridors of power, the instinct is always to contain, to hold close, to analyze behind closed doors before revealing anything to the public. If proof emerged suddenly, a photographed artifact, a confirmed traveler, governments would likely try to seize it as quickly as possible. Possession of evidence would mean possession of narrative, and possession of narrative is the foundation of authority. Immediately, intelligence services would move to classify, to restrict, to detain anyone involved. Laboratories under military jurisdiction would attempt to study the artifact or interrogate the traveler, seeking not only understanding but strategic advantage. For in every government's mind, the discovery of time travel would not just be a scientific curiosity, it would be a potential weapon, a tool, a leverage point around which global power might rotate. Within days of proof, backroom meetings would multiply in crisis tones. Presidents, prime ministers, and generals would argue in private chambers about the consequences. Could enemies use time travelers to alter battles of the past or secure victories of the future? Could economic systems collapse if knowledge of markets ahead is exploited? Could technology from tomorrow be stolen or borrowed, giving one nation supremacy against all others? Governments would realize swiftly that time travel, or even mere proof of it, changes the balance of power utterly. The stakes already high in global politics would expand into dimensions never before imagined. And so, secrecy would likely draw nations into competition. Every government would wish to be the first to understand, to weaponize if possible, to ensure that rivals do not gain the upper hand. Cooperation may be spoken of in public, but beneath the surface, suspicion would flow. Intelligence agencies would scramble to identify any sign that other powers possess contact with time travelers. Spies would be deployed not only across borders but into laboratories, universities, even into historical archives where faint clues might provide competitors with sudden advantage. In this rush for dominance, humanity's fragmentation into nations might be sharpened rather than softened. The proof of time travel might not unite as it could drive us deeper into rivalry. And yet, secrecy cannot last forever. Proof, by its very nature, cannot simply vanish. If undeniable evidence exists, an artifact, a traveler, technological traces, so too does the potential for it to spread beyond government control. Eventually, public knowledge would grow, and citizens would demand transparency. In democracies, voters would pressure their leaders to reveal what they know. In authoritarian states, rumors would circulate with a force no censorship could contain. Governments would face the delicate task of balancing disclosure with stability. To reveal too much might cause panic, but to remain silent would erode trust. Either choice carries peril, and whichever path they take, governments will never again command the same confidence once it is known that realities greater than them exist. The apparatus of law and policy, too, would struggle to respond. Presently, laws regulate space, territory, even cyberspace. But how to legislate time itself? If people begin to accept that travelers move across centuries, what protections are in place to prevent interference? If a citizen were to claim harm by the actions of a traveler, legal systems would have no precedent to adjudicate such a case. New frameworks of law would need to be written, stretching beyond the temporal borders of the present. Legislatures might draft temporal accords, agreements meant to restrict how states use time travel, akin to nuclear treaties but infinitely more complex. Whether such frameworks could ever hold is doubtful, but the attempt would be inevitable, for governments cannot simply permit the uncontrolled. They must legislate, even if the law chases shadows it cannot yet grasp. Consider, too, the military. Armed forces across the globe would analyze the implications with nervous awe. If time travel is possible, then every battle ever fought could, in theory, be altered. The temptation to weaponize time would be overwhelming, to send scouts into the past to anticipate enemy moves, to deliver weapons into battles long finished, to sabotage rivals before their armies or technologies even arise. The mere possibility would rewrite strategy, even without functioning technology in hand. Militaries are built on anticipation and deterrence. If one force even suspects another possesses access to travelers, the entire system of global defense becomes unstable. Proof of time travelers would, from a military perspective, be more disruptive than any superweapon ever built. At the same time, some leaders might recognize that the very danger of paradox could restrain usage. If altering the past risks undoing the present, then deploying travelers as weapons could backfire catastrophically. Governments might create strict doctrines prohibiting interference in the past, enforced not out of altruism but out of fear of destabilizing their own histories. On the other hand, darker regimes might gamble, believing the benefits worth the risk. Proof of time travelers would therefore divide nations not only by capability but by philosophy. Some would cling to restraint, others embrace recklessness, still others deny the threat altogether. The political landscape would fracture along lines drawn not simply by borders, but by beliefs about how time should be treated. Meanwhile, among the people, activists, thinkers, and movements would begin to organize. Some would march demanding that governments share knowledge openly, insisting that time travel belongs to all humanity rather than being hoarded by elites. Others would protest against any interference with time at all, seeing it as dangerous hubris. Movements might arise calling for temporal rights, a recognition that the citizens of every era deserve respect, that travelers cannot alter the past at will. The politics of the present would suddenly become the politics of all time. Leaders would be forced to respond not only to citizens of today but to the imagined voices of past and future generations. The international stage would reflect all these pressures. Organizations like the United Nations would inevitably convene emergency assemblies. Delegates from across the globe would meet to debate time itself, perhaps drafting new resolutions, treaties, or committees devoted entirely to regulating and studying travelers. The debates would be endless and fraught. Who decides the rules? Who enforces them? Can travelers even be bound by laws, when their very existence suggests the possibility of stepping outside enforcement mechanisms altogether? Diplomacy, already fragile in the present world, would be stressed almost to breaking by the burden of negotiating temporal ethics. Proof of time travelers could inspire humanity's first truly global partnership or its deepest descent into fragmentation. And yet, amid all this, individual governments would crave understanding for themselves. Secret programs would proliferate, projects hidden within research agencies, aiming to capture technology or simulate traveler methods. Budgets would expand in silence, known only to a handful of officials. Entire wings of military budgets might be devoted to temporal research, disguised under neutral labels. In basements and remote laboratories, scientists would labor under strict surveillance, their work concealed from public knowledge, all in pursuit of unlocking what proof had suggested. This secrecy would deepen distrust, creating layers of hidden competition across the world. The existence of travelers would not merely reshape politics openly, it would drive the creation of a shadow world, a politics of secrecy layered beneath nations' public faces. And yet, underneath power, underneath weaponry, underneath law and secrecy, there would remain the deeper political truth. Proof of time travelers is a reminder that governments, however vast, do not command the ultimate stage. For the ultimate stage is time itself, and travelers walk upon it with disregard for borders, for lines of sovereignty, for the illusions of permanence. Leaders may try to control, but the revelation of proof would humble them. Their reigns, their ideologies, their wars, all these become small pieces in a larger canvas where travelers exist. The political theater that feels so consuming to us now would be revealed as transient, brief not only in lifespan but even in temporal borders. Proof would remind leaders, in ways they may find intolerable, that power is fleeting even when claimed with iron grip. The paradox of government, then, is that it must respond to proof not only outwardly in strength but inwardly in humility. Leaders would proclaim bold measures, declare laws, and attempt to seize authority. But quietly, they would wonder what it means that travelers walk freely among us, perhaps disregarding the rules they build. In secret moments, even the most powerful presidents and monarchs might confess their awe and their fear. That time, which has been the great horizon of power, is no longer theirs to command. The political consequences of proof would last for generations. Today's governments might scramble in secrecy. Tomorrow's might attempt cooperation. Decades later, humanity may carve out entirely new forms of leadership shaped around temporal awareness. Councils not only of nations but of eras. Governments that rule not just across space but across the ethics of time. Proof would be the seed of institutions not yet born, institutions that must wrestle with questions no system before has dared address. And so, as night falls on this chapter, we imagine the quiet halls of power, lit by dim lamps late into the night, as leaders confront the unthinkable. Stacks of intelligence reports on their desks, artifacts under guard, scientists pressing results into their trembling hands. Outside, citizens whisper. Beyond, rivals scheme. And in those rooms, they realize what we all must realize, that the discovery of proof stretches politics beyond politics, government beyond government. It is not only the challenge of leadership but of humanity itself. Proof of time travelers would remind every state, every ruler, every council that time has never belonged to them. It flows far wider, carries far greater passengers, and humbles even the most powerful among us. If politics and power would tremble before the arrival of proof, it is within the realm of religion, spirituality, and philosophy that the deepest questions would echo into eternity. For governments may rule nations, and scientists may measure the cosmos, but faith and thought are what guide the human heart in its most private hours of doubt, of hope, of searching. Proof of time travelers would not leave these inner landscapes untouched. It would reshape them with force both gentle and overwhelming, like tides washing upon shores that thought themselves eternal. For millennia, religion has served as humanity's answer to mystery. When the world seemed incomprehensible, lightning striking from the heavens, crops withering without rain, visions arising in dream and prophecy, it was faith that provided meaning, stitching patterns where none could be seen. Time travelers, undeniable and real, would confront these intricate patterns in ways that no revelation before ever has. Were the prophets of old true messengers of the divine, or could some have been visitors from centuries yet unfolded? Were miracles acts of supernatural grace, or could they have been glimpses of technology far beyond the reach of their time? Faith communities across the world would wrestle with these questions, torn between the reassurance that travelers confirm the vastness of mystery, and the fear that they strip away the divine by grounding it in mechanics. Consider the great texts of the world's religions, scriptures recording visions, messengers, unexplained wisdom, stories of journeys beyond ordinary realms. Proof would invite reinterpretation. Some would see parallels between descriptions of radiant beings and the possibility of travelers carrying tools of illumination from distant ages. Others would argue fiercely that no traveler, no matter how advanced, could account for the depth of the spiritual truths conveyed, that travelers may play roles within stories of faith, but cannot replace the sacred source itself. Faith, after all, is not so easily unseated. Even when confronted with the unprecedented, communities often reframe their beliefs rather than discard them. Proof of time travelers might therefore not erase religion but deepen its variety, offering some believers new metaphors, fresh interpretations, different ways of weaving mystery into doctrine. Yet the challenges cannot be ignored. For those faiths that emphasize linear time, the notion of a beginning, a middle, and an end, the idea of travelers, destabilizes cherished frameworks. If humanity can move backward and forward across eras, what does that mean for prophecies of end times, for rituals of redemption, for promises of eternity? If the future already exists, visited and revisited, then is destiny written? Do humans still have free will, or is every act already known to those who walked ahead of us? Some believers may find this invigorating, feeling that proof confirms divine order so vast that even time itself bows to it. Others may experience it as destabilizing, a concept that undermines the sacred freedom of choice at the heart of many religious paths. Theologies would split into countless arguments, filling sermons and temples with debates that would stretch across generations. Philosophy, too, would be turned upon itself. Since antiquity, thinkers have wrestled with the tension between fate and freedom, between determinism and choice. Proof of time travelers would reignite these age-old debates with renewed urgency. If a traveler from centuries ahead stands before us, then in some sense the future is already real. Does that mean our choices are illusions, simply lines within a script already written? Or does it mean there are many futures, webs branching out, and travelers move not through inevitability but through possibility? The paradox of freedom would awaken again, not within abstract essays, but in households, classrooms, friendships, each person asking themselves whether the decisions they make still carry weight. Proof would not answer the philosophical questions once and for all, it would magnify them, embedding them into the flesh of daily life. Religious leaders, faced with the weight of proof, would divide in their responses. Some would proclaim the travelers as part of destiny, foretold by prophecies, bearers of divine will sent to guide humanity. Others would condemn them as deceivers, distortions meant to distract humanity from spiritual truth. Certain groups might embrace travelers openly, building new rituals and prayers around their existence, imagining them as angels of new eras. Others might resist, retreating into stricter interpretations of Scripture, doubling down on traditional belief as bulwark against a world unraveling. Proof, in this way, would act like a prism, refracting faith into diverse responses, no longer unified but scattered into multicolored visions, each vivid, each intense, each claiming to hold the truth. For spirituality beyond organized religion, proof would awaken profound longing. Mystics, seekers, and dreamers would interpret travelers as symbolic of the soul's eternal journey, confirmation that life is broader than we perceive. Meditation halls would fill with those wondering if time itself can be crossed in spirit as well as in body. The metaphor of reincarnation might be reimagined, not only as cycles of birth but as cycles of movement across eras. Travelers might become archetypes of awakening, embodiments of what it means to loosen attachment to one single moment and embrace timeless existence. For the spiritual imagination, proof would be fuel, a sacred sign that the universe cradles us in patterns far beyond the grasp of clocks. But philosophical anxiety would not disappear. The problem of paradox clings with even greater weight in spiritual and philosophical contexts. Suppose a traveler reveals knowledge that alters the foundations of a religion. Suppose they show, with undeniable clarity, that a sacred figure rose not by miracle but by technology. Faiths could fracture, collapsing under the strain of disillusionment. Or, paradoxically, these same revelations could be reabsorbed, maintaining faith by declaring, the traveler's technology itself was divine providence, a tool wielded by the sacred. In either case, the proof of travelers remakes theology into a living drama. Faith no longer resides solely in the unseen, it must wrestle with figures who traverse centuries before human eyes. Meanwhile, philosophy's deepest questions of identity and existence would expand dramatically. If time travel is real, then what is the self? Are we confined to the sliver of present between past and future, or are we being stretched across timelines, already known, already entangled? If a traveler from the future meets us, are we speaking with descendants, with strangers, or with ourselves across ages? The boundaries between I and they, here and there, blur into something subtler. Proof would force philosophers to abandon shallow distinctions and embrace complexity, that the self may be layered, that the universe may weave individuals across time like threads in a single tapestry. Imagine the effect in sacred spaces. A monastery at dawn, where monks chant as the rising sun spills through stone arches. Into this quiet comes the knowledge. Proof has confirmed that humans walk across centuries. The monks continue chanting, their voices steady, but behind the sound lies a new silence. Some may imagine their chants carrying not only to the divine but resonating into the ears of travelers beyond time. A cathedral filled with candles, each flame trembling in the windless dark. Now those flames might represent not only eternal spirit but lights recognized by eyes not yet born. A desert hermit meditating beneath cold stars might now feel the pulse of future humanity drifting among the constellations, carried backward in glimpses. Proof folds into ritual, reanimates it, reshapes it with layers of awe that speak to both science and spirit in one breath. Philosophers dwelling in solitude, too, would find their pens restless. They would sit in quiet rooms, stroke pages with thoughts they believed contained only abstract play, now electrified by proof. Whole journals might be rewritten, theories of reality expanded, arguments repeated with renewed force. The metaphysical questions about causality, time, identity, and morality would burst anew into academia and beyond, now populated not by speculation but by living evidence that travelers exist. Whole new fields of philosophy would bloom, temporal ethics foremost among them, debates about the rightness and wrongness of interfering with the past, about the duties travelers carry to those whose lives they might alter. For philosophy is always at its strongest when grounded in the real, and proof would press its questions into hearts and minds as no hypothetical ever could. Across the centuries, humanity has longed for reassurance that our lives are not meaningless, our struggles not trivial. For religion, that reassurance is the eternal. For philosophy, it is truth sought through reason. Proof of time travelers offers a third form of reassurance, that our lives are part of a continuum larger than we imagined, that echoes of us may be heard in centuries yet unborn, that perhaps, someday, we may even walk there ourselves. Some will dismiss this as frightening. Others will embrace it with joy. But none will be unchanged. And so, in temples, in classrooms, in quiet rooms of thought, faith and philosophy would bend beneath the weight of proof, not destroyed, but remade, expanded, unsettled, and deepened. Humanity would look again at its prophets, its visions, its philosophies of time, now seen through eyes opened wider. Proof would remind us that meaning is not static but evolutionary, not confined but ever broadening. We are not only creatures of one moment, bound to the now. We are participants in a grander rhythm, carried by the mystery of existence, rooted within faith and thought, stretched across corridors where travelers walk. Thus religion, spirituality, and philosophy would not end with proof. They would begin again. Each faith would tell its story anew, each philosophy write its treatise again, each seeker meditate with expanded imagination. Proof of time travelers would not extinguish the sacred flame, it would reveal that flame burning behind more veils than we dared imagine, a light reaching not only across this world but across the ages, unfolding eternally. If undeniable proof of time travel shapes science, politics, history, and faith, then it is in the realm of ethics that humanity would find its deepest unease. For ethics is where every great discovery ultimately arrives. Science asks what can be done, ethics asks whether it should. Politics asks how to wield power, ethics asks what obligations come with it. Religion asks what is sacred, ethics asks how to preserve it. Proof of time travelers resounds most heavily here, for it forces a confrontation not just with fact, but with choices that may ripple not only through the present, but across centuries before and behind us. The first ethical question that surfaces is interference. If it is possible to move backward and forward across time, what right does anyone have to intervene? To meet a person in another century is already to carry influence through words, through gestures, through presence itself. Even a simple warning could alter the course of history. If a traveler tells a village of an approaching famine, and the villagers act differently, they may survive, but at what cost to the timeline that once was? If a traveler whispers advice to a ruler about wars yet to come, new futures might take root while others wither away. The dilemma is stark: should travelers act to prevent suffering, even if it risks reshaping history, or must they remain silent, even as they watch pain unfold? Proof would bring this abstract tension into sharp reality, demanding answers from humanity not as thought experiments, but as policies, as codes, as lived choices. And herein lies one of the greatest burdens of ethics, responsibility not only for those we can see, but for those unseen. If time travel is possible, lives across the ages become linked. Every action echoes both backward and forward. Imagine the weight of knowing that a simple gesture might destroy millions of lives once lived, or bring into existence future generations who otherwise would not be born. Ordinary ethics governs the relationships between people alive in the same time. Temporal ethics would stretch responsibility across centuries, binding us to both ancestors and descendants. To hold proof in one's hands would be to feel the heaviness of history itself pressing upon our choices. The paradox of knowledge deepens this dilemma. Suppose a traveler foresees a disaster, an earthquake, a war, a plague. If they intervene to prevent it, they may save countless lives, but they also create a new dilemma. Those rescued lives may alter the balance of power, the unfolding of inventions, even the simple meeting of lovers whose descendants may now or may not exist. In choosing to prevent one suffering, countless unknown consequences cascade outward. On the other hand, if the traveler remains silent, seeing the disaster but refusing to act, are they complicit in that suffering? Which carries greater ethical weight, to preserve the timeline at the cost of human lives, or to preserve lives at the cost of rewriting history? Philosophers would argue over these questions endlessly, but for real travelers, the dilemmas would not be hypothetical, they would be lived. Imagine standing before a child who will die tomorrow of an illness you know how to cure, because you carry medicine from centuries ahead. To give the medicine is to defy the natural path of events, perhaps irreparably. Not to give it is to allow the child's suffering knowingly. No matter the choice, there is loss. Proof of time travelers tells us one thing above all: ethics becomes impossibly heavy when time itself is at stake. This brings forward the haunting specter of paradox. What if a traveler, seeking to save a life, prevents the very future in which they themselves exist? The famous paradox of erasing one's own ancestor, of undoing the possibility of one's own birth, reflects a deeper problem. Should acts that collapse timelines be morally forbidden? If so, who enforces such prohibition, and how? If paradox is not only possible but real, then responsibility extends beyond saving or harming lives. It encompasses the stability of reality itself. To alter the past might not only kill individuals but unravel the world as we know it, replaced with a timeline that carries no memory of what once was. To consider this possibility is to tremble before a moral weight greater than any war, any political system, any law. Travelers themselves, if real, would become the subjects of profound suspicion and reverence. Are they bound by ethics, or do they walk ungoverned? If one traveler chooses to intervene, reshaping centuries, do others have a duty to resist them? Would an entire code of law for travelers need to be written, enforced by councils or global agreements? And yet how could such laws be enforced when travelers slip beyond the reach of contemporaneous authority? Even governments, with all their power, might find themselves helpless before travelers guided only by their personal moral codes. The trust of the world might rest in the conscience of individuals who step across centuries. Whether they act with restraint or recklessness would determine not only outcomes of singular lives, but the destiny of civilizations. Among the gravest of ethical questions lies the problem of exploitation. If travelers carry knowledge of the future, should they be permitted to use it for profit, for power, for advantage? Imagine a traveler arriving in the 21st century, bringing knowledge of future investments, future technologies, future discoveries. To use that knowledge for personal gain would be exploitation writ large, collapsing economies, distorting fairness, and depriving humanity of its natural unfolding. Yet to suppress such knowledge entirely may itself be unethical, for it could prevent suffering or accelerate progress. The thin line between exploitation and service would blur endlessly. Those who embrace altruism might be called saviors, those who pursue profit, villains. Yet both sets of actions would reshape the timeline irrevocably. Proof of travelers lifts the question beyond law courts and into the realm of moral judgment, because once time itself is in play, standard laws no longer suffice. We must, too, confront the ethics of secrecy. If proof exists, is it ethical for travelers to hide themselves? To remain invisible while humanity struggles through wars and tragedies that they know could be alleviated? Many would argue that silence is unethical, that those with the power to help carry the obligation to use it. But others would argue differently, that secrecy is itself the only moral path, because intervention risks destabilizing history and perhaps destroying all we know. Which is more ethical, silence that preserves the timeline, or action that risks unraveling it? For travelers themselves, this question may haunt every step. For those aware of them, it becomes perhaps the greatest debate humanity has ever faced. The ethics of identity also shudder before time travel. If a traveler moves backward and becomes known to the past, are they the same person in every era? If they marry, have children, establish lives in times not their own, what responsibility do they bear to those timelines? If they abandon them to return forward, are they guilty of desertion not just of people, but of entire worlds created in their wake? In stories, travelers leap lightly between eras. In real life, the choices would be heartbreakingly heavy, doors opening onto obligations both human and timeless. Proof of Time Travelers therefore invites us to imagine ethics not bounded by roles within one society but roles across many. Responsibility spreads infinitely and unending. Among the most profound dilemmas lies the question of consent. If travelers step into the past, those who meet them never granted consent to be part of altered reality. To bring knowledge, to plant ideas, to reshape possibility, is to impose upon people choices they may not have been able to consider. Whole cultures in antiquity may have been nudged unknowingly. In our present, we too might live lives already influenced by travelers we never chose to meet. Proof would raise this haunting realization that our histories, our cultures, even our choices might never fully have been ours. Is it ethical to live among people of another time without their informed agreement? Consent, so central to modern ethics, becomes impossible across time, and yet its absence lingers as a wound. We must also grapple with the morality of inevitability. Suppose proof shows that travelers cannot change the past, that all interventions collapse into events that always were. Does this absolve them of responsibility, knowing nothing can be altered? Or does it impose an even greater duty, knowing that their actions are already woven into destiny, that in every paradox they are bound to act or not act precisely as recorded? This question burns with paradoxical intensity. If we can only do what has already been done, is there any place for moral responsibility, or are we players bound by necessity? Travelers, in this view, are no more than instruments of a cosmic pattern. But if that is so, then the ethical weight does not vanish, it multiplies, because every choice carries the gravitas of inevitability. Further still lies the ethics of future generations. If travelers reveal hints of centuries ahead, do we bear the responsibility to change our actions now in light of that knowledge? If a traveler confirms environmental collapse centuries hence, is it our moral duty to act immediately, regardless of cost? Or if they show us visions of wars we once avoided, do we bear responsibility to prevent them, knowing our descendants' suffering lies in our hands? Proof would stretch the concept of morality far beyond lifetimes. Ethics would become intergenerational, binding us not only to one another but to those whose lives bloom and fade long after we are gone. Temporal morality would be nothing less than universal responsibility across the whole tapestry of time. And yet, it might be in these dilemmas that humanity finally wakes to ethical maturity. For too long, our choices have centered on the present: what benefits us now, what alleviates immediate suffering, what preserves current power. Proof of Time Travelers would demand a broader vision, ethics not only for moments, but for epochs. It would demand humility in action, restraint in intervention, reverence for possibilities unseen. It would call upon us to act not as isolated individuals, but as caretakers of a continuum too vast to comprehend. In the silence of night, one might wonder if perhaps this is the true gift of proof, not the mechanics of time, but the lesson of responsibility stretched across it. Thus the ethics of proof stand not only as challenge but as call. To travelers, they whisper with every step, tread lightly, for the lives you touch ripple endlessly. To governments, they warn, power without restraint may destroy not just nations but time itself. To individuals, they invite, live with awareness that your choices participate in stories far older and larger than yourself. Proof would press upon humanity the deepest realization: every moment is sacred, for every moment is interwoven through centuries. Ethics would no longer be about rules alone, but about reverence. Life, once seen as fleeting, becomes part of timeless care, an unending responsibility across the ages. And so, In monasteries and parliaments, in classrooms and quiet hearts, the question would echo, what is right, when time itself can be touched? No easy answer will ever suffice. Proof of time travelers deepens morality beyond simplicity, weaving paradox into conscience, impossibility into choice. And perhaps, just perhaps, this is its ultimate meaning. That time exists not simply to measure days but to remind us that every action, however small, carries the weight of eternity. If ethics demands reflection on what we should or should not do with proof of time travelers, then the natural next horizon is to imagine where such proof would lead us. Once humanity accepts, without denial or hesitation, that time travel is real and that travelers have walked among us, the question no longer remains, what does this mean? But instead becomes, what comes next? The pathways diverge like branches upon a great tree, some reaching toward light, others curving back into shadow. Each possibility carries with it both promise and peril, hope and unease. The future after discovery is itself a field of many futures, and it is within these imagined paths that humanity must decide its course. One trajectory is the path of unity. Proof of time travelers might provide the first true common ground for all of humanity. Differences of nation, language, creed, and generation might pale before the undeniable fact that we are part of a single temporal continuum. If travelers exist, then the struggles of our ancestors and the dreams of our descendants are not only metaphors but lived realities. A child in one place and century is tethered by invisible threads to another child centuries away, and proof would reveal those threads as tangible and real. Leaders, moved by awe, might finally set aside rivalries, seeking collaboration not for immediate gain but for the preservation of humanity's timeline itself. Global councils could form, dedicated not to controlling resources or weapons, but to harmonizing how humanity interacts with time. In this vision, proof of time travelers could ignite an age of cooperation, reminding us that we are guardians not simply of the earth but of time itself. In such a scenario, universities would blossom into centers of temporal study, not only teaching history but welcoming future perspectives as equal voices. Students might learn alongside travelers, hearing first-hand accounts of centuries they will never otherwise see. Civilizations would gain humility, recognizing that no single culture defines humanity's destiny. Music, art, and philosophy would spread across centuries, with knowledge looping endlessly from past to future, and future to past. In this unity, humanity might grow wiser, slower to war, quicker to empathy, realizing that harm to one era is harm to all eras. Time travel, in this vision, becomes not a weapon but a teacher, not a disruption but a bridge. The future we imagine shines peacefully, woven of patience and shared care. Yet another path beckons, darker in its allure, the path of domination. Proof of time travelers could, instead of unifying humanity, shatter it into conflict. Nations and corporations might see in time travel not a responsibility but an opportunity. To glimpse tomorrow before it arrives is to hold immense advantage. The ability to harvest technologies, ideas, or even natural resources from other centuries becomes irresistible. Wars could be fought not across borders of geography but across the lines of time itself. Rival powers might race to recruit travelers, to extract their knowledge, to control them as assets rather than honor them as guests. In this grim vision, time travel becomes yet another commodity to hoard, weaponize, and exploit. Humanity, instead of expanding its wisdom, contracts into greed, turning the gift of proof into the most devastating arms race ever conceived. If this darker path is taken, societies may fracture under paranoia. Citizens may no longer trust their governments, suspecting that every decision, every law, every economic fluctuation results not from the natural flow of the present but from manipulation by those exploiting the future. Conspiracy would no longer be fringe, it would be plausible daily reality. Ordinary people would wonder whether their leaders act on present knowledge or on whispers stolen from tomorrow. The collapse of faith in governance could unravel political systems, creating chaos in which the strongest seize control. In this vision, history itself becomes a battlefield, rewritten again and again until continuity itself is lost. Proof would remain, but it would no longer inspire wonder, it would serve as constant reminder of humanity's inability to preserve integrity before power. Between these two extremes lies a third path, one of careful restraint. Humanity might choose not to exploit travelers but to listen, to observe, to learn from a distance while establishing barriers against full adoption of their power. In this vision, treaties might forbid weaponization, limit exploitation, and enshrine the principle of non-interference. Travelers might be welcomed as advisors, but humanity could commit firmly to walking its own road, refusing to bend destiny fully to the influence of knowledge from ahead. This future preserves humility, allowing time travel to exist but preventing it from dominating. Yet it requires extraordinary balance, skepticism and openness, restraint and curiosity. To hold such a balance against the pull of greed demands discipline few societies have achieved before. Still, if proof were clear enough, the sheer weight of awe might grant humanity that discipline, at least for a season. But futures may not be so orderly. There exists the possibility of fragmentation into multiple realities. Proof of time travelers may indicate not only that time can be traversed, but that every act of interference branches into new timelines. If this is true, then humanity might one day awaken to the recognition that there is no singular future, but countless. Some timelines may thrive, learning peace, compassion, and wisdom, while others collapse into ruin. Proof of time travel would then carry within it a terrifying freedom, that our choices may spawn countless worlds, each carrying their own humanity, their own joys, their own tragedies. Imagine waking to realize that every moral dilemma resolved one way in this world flourished differently in another, creating echoes of humanity living through every variation of every choice. Some might rejoice in the multiverse, comforted by the idea that every possibility unfolds somewhere. Others might mourn it, feeling despair that infinity robs choice of meaning. Proof of time travelers would, in this vision, unlock not only time but possibility itself, multiplying futures into endless labyrinths. Of course, humanity may also stumble onto the path of wonder without domination, treating proof not as a tool, not as a warning, but as a revelation of mystery. In this scenario, society recognizes the limits of comprehension. Religious traditions weave travelers into myth and prayer without demanding theology to explain them away. Philosophers embrace paradox without resolving it, finding beauty not in answers but in questions. Science continues its pursuit but with newfound humility, knowing not all can be tamed. Humanity, for the first time, accepts that some truths remain larger than mastery, that travelers are not here to be captured, controlled, or codified, but to remind us that the universe remains infinitely beyond our reach. In this scenario, proof of time travelers becomes a sacred reminder rather than a resource, holding us gently in place between awe and caution. No path, however, comes without cost. Even in the most hopeful future, travelers themselves may suffer. To be a traveler is to be both honored and burdened, celebrated yet isolated. They may find themselves interrogated by governments, idolized by cults, misunderstood by neighbors, dissected by historians, and romanticized by artists. Few may ask them what they themselves want. Proof of time travelers would raise ethical and philosophical dilemmas of freedom not only for us but for them. Are they forever bound to the expectations of those who see them as prophets, tools, or teachers? That question lingers across every path, demanding compassion that transcends our instinct to define travelers as symbols rather than as people. And then there is the strangest future of all, a future in which humanity itself becomes the traveler. Proof may ignite such ambition among scientists and engineers, philosophers and dreamers, that one day we master the technologies glimpsed in artifacts or whispered about in Anomalies. In this future, humanity steps boldly across the centuries, not as passive recipients of visitors but as travelers ourselves. Whole expeditions might voyage into distant pasts, walking among mammoths or pharaohs or medieval villages. Others might leap forward, seeking civilizations not yet born. Time travel in our hands could become the greatest adventure in history. Schools might tour centuries, families might vacation in other ages, researchers might catalogue firsthand all epochs of the earth. Yet once again, with such power comes peril. Would we respect the integrity of the past, or desecrate it as tourists leave footprints where footprints were never meant to be? The glorious vision of universal travel may quickly darken if humanity carries its flaws with it across centuries. Proof of time travelers is not simply about others, it may be foreshadowing our own destiny. In each of these visions, unity, domination, restraint, fragmentation, mystery, or direct participation, the future after proof is both fragile and grand. It reflects the best and worst of humanity, magnified by the scale of time itself. Some are hopeful, some terrifying, some humbling beyond imagination. But all share one thread. Proof ensures that humanity will never again imagine itself constrained to the narrow corridor of the present. Once we know travelers exist, the future cannot be unseen. The possibilities stretch outward like starlight across a night sky, dense, infinite, unending. And as we imagine these futures, the deepest question arises: which future will we choose? Will we grasp for power, at the risk of destroying not only history but ourselves? Will we step softly, preserving mystery even as we walk beside it? Will we fracture into countless worlds, or will we unite across centuries? Proof of time travelers does not dictate these outcomes. It only places in our hands the awareness that choice itself is magnified beyond comprehension. It invites us to live with reverence as never before, to see not only our neighbors but our ancestors, not only our children but our farthest descendants, in every decision we make. For in the unfolding of all these scenarios lies a single recognition: the future after proof is not about time travelers alone. It is about us. Who we are, how we respond, how we rise or falter beneath the weight of knowledge. Travelers may arrive and depart, but humanity remains the steward of its own destiny. Our wisdom, or our folly, will carve the path stretching forward. Proof provides no map, it only shows us that the territory of time is larger than we thought. The map must be drawn by our hands, hesitating, trembling, daring, and dreaming in equal measure. And so, as we look toward the future's proof may shape, our breath slows, our hearts turn inward. For the discovery of travelers is not simply about technology or anomaly, it is about humanity confronting itself. The futures we imagine are born from choices made now, in our moment. Proof whispers, the time we inhabit is not ours alone, it belongs to all who came before, and all who will come after. And with this whisper, humanity steps into its most profound responsibility. The corridor of time, once narrow, now reveals itself as endless. The door has been opened. What lies beyond depends not on those who traveled first, but on us, the travelers just beginning to see. When all that can be imagined has been spoken, when science, politics, history, religion, philosophy, and ethics have each bent beneath the weight of proof, when the futures stretch outward in dazzling arrays of possibility, there remains only one place left to turn the present moment. For however vast time is revealed to be, however many centuries can be crossed or rewritten, the truth of life is still lived here, in each breath, in each heartbeat, in each waking moment of awareness. Proof of time travelers, staggering though it would be, does not erase the present. It heightens it. It casts the now in sharper relief, reminding us that the only doorway across ages is always entered from where we stand. And in that recognition lies the final lesson. The discovery that travelers exist no longer myth, no longer imagination, but undeniable proof may first overwhelm us with thoughts of what was and what will be. Yet as wonder subsides and contemplation grows, we begin to realize that the gift of proof is not ultimately about other centuries at all. It is about noticing the one we already occupy. For too often human beings slip through their own days unmindful, their eyes fixed on some distant later, their hearts caught in remembering some fading before. The revelation that time is not so rigid may inspire not only cosmic dreams but personal awakenings, gently reminding us to live more fully, here, now, before time slips again from our grasp. Imagine walking through a quiet street at dusk, knowing proof has been declared, knowing travelers exist. The street is still the same, lamps flicker against the evening, footsteps echo across worn stone, the scent of food drifts softly from kitchens. But the knowledge in your mind transforms the ordinary. These footsteps may be heard by others centuries away, these lamps may burn in memory beyond your age. The crack of a door opening, the laughter of a child, the hand you hold suddenly, these are not fleeting but timeless, folded into a continuum where nothing truly vanishes. Proof of time travelers may teach us, finally, that the mundane is sacred, that the simplest of moments pulse with eternity. There is also the lesson of humility. Throughout history, humanity has believed itself the center of creation, of progress, of destiny. Proof would humble us in a way both gentle and profound. We are not the first to glimpse the vastness of existence, nor will we be the last. We are threads in a fabric woven by ancestors and descendants alike. The travelers remind us that history is alive, that the future may already lean into us, that our choices ripple further than our vision. In their footsteps we awaken, reminded that arrogance can never endure before the vast silence of time. In this humility lies compassion. For if travelers exist, then we are all linked in ways deeper than we dared imagine. The stranger met on the street, the neighbor glimpsed through the window, the enemy feared beyond borders, all may resonate across centuries. That enemy's descendants may one day meet your descendants and bind wounds long open. That neighbor's kindness may ripple outward in ways unimaginable. Proof of travelers binds us across time and therefore bids us treat one another with gentleness, as if every face is the face of someone whose story has not finished. Once we realize that lives echo across generations, compassion is not an option, it becomes the fabric of survival. And yet, amid awe, another lesson arises, the lesson of responsibility. Proof of time travelers does not free us from responsibility. It deepens it. If our actions ripple backward and forward, then we must care with greater urgency. Every choice made today carries consequences for centuries. Environmental care, justice, equity, peace, all are no longer matters only of our lifetime but of countless lifetimes beyond. The traveler visiting us from the future is, in a profound sense, a messenger of responsibility, silently reminding that what we do now determines not only who we are but who humanity becomes. Proof of Travelers reveals that the timeline is shaped not only by great figures or leaders but by each moment, each gesture, each life lived with intention. There is also the lesson of acceptance. Proof shows us that paradoxes abound, that time is stranger than we dreamed. We cannot always resolve contradictions, and sometimes we must live with mystery. The impulse to control, to master, to dominate must soften into the willingness to stand before uncertainty without fear. Perhaps the traveler becomes the teacher not of knowledge alone but of acceptance, the recognition that some questions belong not to answers but to wonder, not to certainty but to awe. In that acceptance, humanity may finally find peace, a peace not of solved equations alone but of trust in the vastness we will never fully master. And then, perhaps the final lesson, the one both quietest and most profound, is gratitude. Proof of Time Travelers tells us that reality is stranger than we imagined. But it also tells us that reality holds us within it tenderly enough to allow discovery. We are witnessed, accompanied, not abandoned in isolation. Somewhere, across centuries, others walk with us, connected by threads so delicate and yet unbreakable. Gratitude flows from this awareness, gratitude for the moment now, gratitude for those before, gratitude for those still to come. Gratitude that we are part of something endlessly greater than our imagination. And so, as the long journey of this reflection arrives at its end, we find ourselves not staring outward into endless speculation alone but turning inward, back to the simple truths we sometimes forget. Proof of Time Travelers reminds us that life is not to be clutched in fear of its brevity, but embraced in celebration of its vastness. That time, whether linear or branching, whether elastic or endless, carries us like a river yet still allows us moments to lift our heads, to breathe, to see the stars, to hold the hand of another and know that such gestures matter forever. The ending, then, is no ending at all. It is a continuation, for Proof of Time Travelers is not a final answer but an opening door. What lies beyond is unknown unity or division, peace or conflict, wonder or dread. But whatever unfolds, we will face it as we always have, together, bound in fragile strength, walking slowly forward even when forward is not so straight as we imagined. The final truth may be this: time travel does not abolish the present, does not rob life of meaning, it restores it. Each second becomes a treasure, each choice a thread, each breath a whisper across centuries. And tonight, as eyes close and minds drift into dreams, Proof of Travelers rests not as weight but as lullaby. For whether the future calls us forward or visitors step gently back, we are not alone in the corridor of time. We never have been. We never will be. The footsteps of travelers remind us that existence is larger, and yet, within that largeness, our own lives are precious beyond measure. To sleep in such knowledge is to sleep within the arms of eternity, carried by the currents of time, endless, gentle, and ever unfolding.